When you go broke, a court steps in. A company collapses and someone seizes the assets to sell them off. But when an entire country goes broke, who shows up to collect? Nobody. No judge shuts a country down. No bailiff repossesses the highways. And that, the fact that nobody collects, is exactly why national bankruptcy is one of the most misunderstood ideas in finance. This isn't some far-off problem either. When a country can't pay, the damage doesn't stay inside its borders. It reaches your retirement fund, the price of things on your shelf, the headlines that move markets before lunch. So let's walk through what actually happens, in order, starting with why bankrupt is the wrong word to begin with. Here's what most people get backwards. When a person goes bankrupt, there's a legal process, a court, assets sold, debts wiped or restructured, a clean ending. A company is the same, shut down, picked apart, gone. A country can do none of that. There's no international court with the power to seize a nation. You can't auction off France, nobody's repossessing Japan. The roads stay, the people stay, the government stays. So bankruptcy, the way we normally use the word, isn't even on the table. The right word is default. A country defaults when it can't or won't make a payment it promised. And that's a narrower thing than it sounds. It's not a nation running out of everything, lights off, doors locked. It's a failure to make a specific payment at a specific time to specific lenders. Hold on to that distinction because it changes how every scary headline reads. So why does a country owe money at all? Why not just spend what it collects in taxes? Because almost no government on earth does that. They spend more than they take in, especially through wars, recessions, and crises, which is to say, most of the time. To cover the gap, they borrow, mostly by selling bonds. A bond is a promise on paper. Hand us your money today, we'll pay it back later with interest. Banks buy them, pension funds buy them, other governments buy them, you can buy them. Add it all up, and that's the national debt. And now here's what throws people. Governments almost never actually pay the debt off. When an old bond comes due, they sell a new one to cover it, rolling the debt over in the jargon. And as long as buyers keep showing up, this runs more or less forever. The debt isn't repaid, it's refinanced on a loop. So when does the loop snap? The moment lenders stop believing they'll be paid back. The instant buyers get nervous, they demand a higher interest rate for the risk. Higher rates make borrowing more expensive, which makes the books look worse, which makes lenders more nervous still. It's a confidence machine running in reverse, and it can spiral in a matter of weeks. The fear of not getting paid is what makes not getting paid more likely. But here's the idea that unlocks the whole subject. It's not how much a country owes, it's what it owes it in. The headline number, the trillions, the debt to GDP ratio matters far less than the currency the debt is written in. Put two countries side by side to see it. Identical mountains of debt, completely different fates, and the only difference is the currency. The first borrows in its own money, the currency its own central bank prints. The US borrows in dollars, Japan in yen, Britain in pounds. A country like this has an escape hatch. If a payment comes due and the cash isn't there, the central bank can create more of its own currency to cover it. You can't run out of something you're allowed to print. So a country like this almost never defaults in the strict sense. But the escape hatch has a toll. Print enough to cover your bills, and you usually get inflation, sometimes the runaway kind. The debt gets paid technically, but every unit of currency in everyone's pocket is now worth less. The citizens still foot the bill. They just pay it through rising prices instead of a missed check. For this first country, default was never the real danger. Inflation is. Now, the opposite country, and this is where real national bankruptcies are born. This one borrowed in dollars or euros, money it cannot print. That's common for smaller and developing economies, for a simple reason. Lenders often don't trust the local currency, so they insist on being repaid in something harder. And that's the trap. If you owe dollars, your central bank can't conjure them. You have to earn them through exports, tourism, foreign investment, or buy them. If those dollars stop arriving, you're stuck. There's no printing your way out because you can't print what you don't control. Same debt. One country faces inflation. The other faces a hard default. The only thing that sorted them was the currency on the bond. So say the dollars dry up and the payment can't be made. What happens next? This usually lands in 3 waves. First, the default itself. The government announces it can't pay or quietly misses the date. Its bonds lose a chunk of their value overnight. A promise that won't be kept isn't worth what it was yesterday. And everyone holding them takes a loss. Everyone can include pension funds and banks in your country, holding that paper on your behalf. Second, the currency goes. Foreign investors scramble to pull their money out before it loses more value. And as they dump the local currency, its price falls, sometimes off a cliff. That stampede has a name, capital flight, and it can play out in days. Third, and this is what hits ordinary households hardest, prices explode. Most countries import some of their food, fuel, or medicine, and imports are priced in dollars. When the local currency collapses, everything imported suddenly costs far more. Inflation goes from nuisance to nightmare almost overnight, and savings in the local currency can lose most of their worth before people even register what's happening. So, if you've ever seen the footage, lines out of banks, bare shelves, cars queued for fuel that isn't coming, that's the machinery behind the images. It's not random chaos. It's the predictable result of a currency collapse after a default. The country doesn't disappear. Its people just get poorer, fast. None of this is theory. 3 real cases, and watch the same rule prove itself each time. Start with Argentina. It has defaulted again and again across its history. The textbook foreign currency trap, literally taught in textbooks. In 2001, it walked away from roughly $80 to $90 billion, one of the largest sovereign defaults the world had seen to that point. Chaotic, brutal, and Argentina is still very much here. It has defaulted again since and kept right on going. That's the lesson most people skip. A country can default, survive, and still be standing decades later. Then Greece, in the 2010s, the odd one, because Greece didn't have its own currency. It shares the euro, which means no central bank of its own, no printing press to reach for. So when its crisis hit around 2012, there was no escape hatch, and its private lenders had to swallow a brutal loss, a cut of more than half of what they were owed. That loss has a name, and we'll get to it. Greece is the proof that when you can't print the currency you owe, sometimes it's the lenders who bleed. And the most recent, Sri Lanka, 2022. It simply ran out of foreign currency, the dollars it needed to buy imports and service its debt. Staring at near-empty reserves, it suspended payments on most of its debt. People stood in line for the basics. Sri Lanka is the clearest recent picture of what it looks like the day the dollars just aren't there. 3 countries, 3 decades, 1 pattern, debt in a currency they couldn't control, a local currency that fell, prices that climbed, and ordinary people left holding the worst of it. So back to the question we started with. The bankrupt company has a court to sort out the wreckage. The country has no one. So what happens to all that unpaid debt? This is the strangest part. There's no bankruptcy court for nations. No global judge can force a country to pay, and none can wipe its slate clean either. The only tool left is negotiation. The country and its lenders sit down and cut a deal. Some version of, we'll pay you back, just less or later or both. The reduction the lenders agree to swallow has a name, a haircut. Remember Greece and that cut of more than half? One of the biggest haircuts in modern history. Lenders don't accept it out of kindness. They accept it because something beats nothing, and nothing was the alternative. Then one more player walks in, the International Monetary Fund. When no private lender will go near a country anymore, the IMF can step in with an emergency loan to head off total collapse. Sri Lanka got one approved in 2023. But that money comes with strings, and strict ones. Cut spending, raise taxes, reform the economy. That's the austerity you see people marching against. It can stabilize the books on paper, but it usually means cuts to services, pensions, and jobs at the exact moment citizens are already hurting. The rescue keeps the country afloat, and a lot of ordinary people feel like they're paying for it twice. Now, the part that surprises people, you'd assume default is the end. Game over. It isn't. Countries default and survive all the time. A nation can't be liquidated. It has people, land, an economy that keeps turning on its worst day. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes default is the rational move. If a debt is genuinely impossible to pay, stopping and renegotiating can do less damage than draining the last dollar in the reserves chasing the unpayable. But it leaves scars. Lenders have long memories. For years afterward, a defaulter gets frozen out of normal borrowing, or let back in only at punishing rates, an expensive decision a country keeps paying for long after the cameras leave. And no, printing your way out isn't the loophole it sounds like. The dangerous debt is in dollars, and nobody prints dollars but the United States. So, the question you actually came for: what does any of this have to do with your money? More than you'd guess. If you own a diversified fund, especially anything wearing the emerging markets label, you may already own a sliver of foreign government bonds without ever deciding to. When one of those countries hits trouble, that slice of your portfolio can drop. And now you can read those tempting high interest rates for what they are. A fat yield on a country's bonds isn't generosity. It's the market pricing in the odds it won't be paid back. High yield is a warning label, not a gift. And it doesn't stop at your account. A big sovereign default can rattle markets worldwide because banks and funds are all wired together. A loss in one place forces selling somewhere far away. When Greece was on the brink, it didn't just threaten Greece. It threatened the euro itself and shook banks well beyond its borders. There's a closer-to-home version too. Next time you hear politicians shouting about the national debt, you've got the one question that actually sorts the risk. What currency is that debt in? A wealthy country borrowing in its own currency runs a completely different risk, mostly inflation, than a developing country borrowing in dollars. Same word, debt. Two different animals. None of this is advice about what to buy or sell. It's just the lens that lets you read the news without panicking over the wrong things, or staying calm about the wrong ones. So keep one sentence. It's not how much a country owes, it's what it owes it in. Once you see that, half the scary headlines start to make sense. If this finally made national bankruptcy click, if it stopped being a vague, frightening phrase and turned into something you can reason about, subscribe.